Hey everyone, welcome back to Be Not Afraid. Today we're going to talk about pages 27 through 30 on the Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum. Again, this comes out of California, but California, the federal government does want ethnic studies in every school. And if you're where we are here in Utah, ours comes out in 2024. What we found over these few pages has been pretty much the exact same thing that you'll see on a YouTube presentation by Christine Sleeters, who is behind creating the ethnic studies curriculum. Okay. So this is why ethnic studies and critical theory matter for education. This is Christine Sleeters. Christine Sleeters is behind the concept of transformative ethnic studies. The first point that I was looking at was 2930. Probably over there.
So Tolteca picked up on that and engaged in conversations with other people involved in ethnic studies in California and developed this framework, which we're using for the book. And the idea is that ethnic studies deals with what we're calling a double helix of humanity and criticality. By humanity, we mean working towards restoring the humanity among students and communities of color who have been dehumanized in the process of living with racism and colonization every day, including in the schools, and providing space in the schools that reclaims that humanity.
So I know you have something to say. Oh, okay, you go ahead.
You go ahead first. Go ahead.
So, we just celebrated Constitution Day and how amazing this document is. And I just got finished listening to David Barton about how in the history of the world, no other constitution has survived for 35 years or so, 36. And the longest before that was 17 years. And so either you believe that our country has worked for that long or you don't. And so the people, Christine Sleeters right here is saying the country that we're living in doesn't work. We are trying to restore it. So you have to decide as you're doing this, like we're trying to present this, our ethnic studies, is this the solution they're presenting it to be? I think we need to back up and say, is our country the best country in the history of the world? As far as the Constitution providing equality, becoming better. It's not like, is it perfect? No, we're on a growth pattern. We're going there. There have been errors. We've been correcting them. But are people coming to our nation for some reason? If they are, why? And looking and saying, is there something good that we want to preserve, or are we going to tear it down? Because for this ethnic studies program, there's a huge deficit in our education, and that most people don't understand civics. They don't know how our country works. And so to say, in order to improve all of America, then we need to have ethnic studies. I'm like, no, you need to understand how our country works and why it's worked that way. That's the real problem. So if we say, hey, ethnic studies, multicultural studies, all this stuff that we can argue, well, no, here's the hidden agenda. And well, actually, this is good. But we have to back up and say, is our country worth preserving? That's the question that comes first. And if it is, what do we do to preserve it? Because it's at odds. We're in danger of losing our freedoms right now. Government's getting too big. Anyway, and so ethnic studies is presented as the solution to topple America. Now, people might not agree with that, but that's why we're doing
she openly says it. She openly says that it is rooted in capitalism. They need to go through the systems rooted in capitalism and oppression. She wants these kids to see everything in their personal experience in 2023 as if they live, her words, every day in a colonized system. So, and could you say that we're a colonized system? Absolutely. If you go all the way back, yes, we came over here and we took land from the Native Americans. Tell me a country that hasn't. But she openly talks about in this that this is Western civilization that they're focused on. and how Western civilization has done this. And then tell me about, and Lynn, you might be able to speak to this, but tell me about native, quote unquote, indigenous people who haven't colonized each other, who haven't won in battles and taken over. But yes, her ability to speak and to not allow other people to speak is one of the biggest problems. Like, they talk about this like this is truth.
Humanity that gets lost when kids are put down all the time. Criticality is developing a mindset for thinking critically about the world and your place in that world, and particularly looking at how actions and people and stuff are embedded in unequal relations of power, and asking what can be done to change those relations.
Pause. She's teaching these people to be activists. She says criticality is about changing a child's mindset. So a child comes into school full of hope, full of the potential, full of the interests in learning whatever it is, whatever their goal is that they want to do. And she says, no, our goal is now to turn them to find out why the systems are oppressive, specifically to them, how they live under an oppressive system.
The thing that's disturbing about this, and to address everything that Brooke said, was absolutely spot on. The Constitution has been the only layout for government that has worked in the history of mankind, that has worked as long as it has. But then what I hear her, she's not playing into, she's not grateful for those principles of the Constitution that keep us free and to keep us as a nation of one, regardless of the racial differences that we have. This happens. It's just a matter of, it's the growing pains of a nation, because after all, we're human beings. But what she is pushing is deliberately against the Constitution and the freedoms that we have always enjoyed. And she's moving into Marxism. She's moving into a totalitarian controlled environment where she is talking about the downplay of certain humanity and underplaying the position of others. So I don't know if I made that very clear, but this is what I see her doing. And she has, to me, in my opinion, hey, it's my opinion, she has nothing to do with the Constitution and people's rights.
No. Mm-mm. And even Martin Luther King, one of my favorite lines was, he's like, we have a promissory note. You know, this is a promissory note for freedom in the Constitution. And Elizabeth Freeman, who both you and my daughter portrayed at Constitution Day and Freedom Lights, she recognized in the Constitution that she was equal, even though the practice in our society did not give her freedoms. She sued for it and she won. And that's the thing, you recognize where you're going to get true equality, and it's in that Constitution. And so she's like, no, this is not the solution for it. And if you don't see that as the solution in this country, then you most likely want to take the country down.
And that's true. I just saw a true story about a migrant farm worker, just a kid. He had aspirations and dreams, and race, ethnicity, it comes into play across the board. Not everybody is like that. It's like that for everyone. And no matter what color you are born into, you have the capabilities in this nation, in this country, under the Constitution, to be able to move up the ladder. You have that right, that blessing, that ability, and it comes down to you. And this country is the most accepting country that I know of across the globe that welcomes people in. I saw this during 9/11, but this is just a fact of life every day. But this fellow came from a migrant farm worker in California, and the title was From Migrant Worker to Astronaut. He became an astronaut because he took all of those difficulties that more or less all of us have to face at some point or other, but he moved up that ladder because this is what he wanted to do. This is who he wanted to be. And this country gave him that
Well,
possibility.
that's the whole thing, because I do want to stick as much as we can on the ethnic studies, but the thing is that she says to focus on your oppression, and the way commonly that everyone's thread goes through is that we all have things we have to overcome. We all
Yes.
have them, and that actually is a common thread in why we respect people in across the board. We
Well,
respect people who have overcome and have accomplished something. And this is going to talk about how their accomplishments become activism. And
well,
that,
and
yes,
oh, go ahead.
you're fine.
When you focus on a negative, and this is something that I've always been taught my whole life, when you focus on a negative, your life becomes a negative. You are not allowed to push through and progress because you're stuck in
Right.
this oppression mode. It
Let's
makes you cynical.
yes, let's keep going on 38 and hear more of what she has to say.
We have 4 core ideas that we're arguing should be part of an ethnic studies curriculum, not necessarily part of like every class session, not even necessarily part of every course, but a part of every program. Indigeneity and roots is the idea of both honoring and paying attention to the indigenous peoples of the place where we are, as well as attending to the indigenous roots that all of us have someplace, and then how our indigeneity shaped who we are. Colonization and dehumanization looks at the process of colonization as it was constructed in the process of building capitalism and in the process of constructing slavery, and historically how capitalism, slavery, and colonization worked together, but did so through dehumanizing people of color around the world. And on.
Please pause. Colonization has happened around the world. Teaching these kids that they need to focus on the past is what keeps them down.
Yes.
That's the whole thing. It's like, yes, this is history. And now, because history has happened, and by the way, history cannot be changed, despite what the revisionists want to tell you. History is there to learn from. And why are we turning everything as if capitalism is the worst thing that has ever happened in the history of ever? Meanwhile, anybody want to do the research and find out how much DEI people are making? I mean, that's kind of capitalism. They're making a bunch of money on this idea that they can sell their idea to other people. And by a bunch of money, yeah.
It is capitalism.
By a bunch of money, I mean, we have somebody here locally who is a DEI advisor and went from making 38,000 a year to 142 in 1 year. 142,000. So over $100,000 raise to teach hatred. So,
well, it's hatred of our country, and it's such a warped view because you're like, hey, we want equality, equity for all, blah 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 blah, except for the white cis males. You know, that's not, because that's been unfair, so we're trying to balance this. But the Constitution is across the board, everybody gets a chance, but what they're preaching is no, not you guys, but everybody else. Right. And their power wheel is saying, or the marginalization, what's that called?
The wheel of privilege.
Yeah, but it's the identity wheel. Anyway, that's like showing, you know,
the wheel of privilege. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, the wheel of privilege. So,
yes.
So you know, even their preaching is so hypocritical in it. You know, for you, not for you, because this reason, and this reason. And the Constitution's like, all men are created equal.
Right.
That's-
And but then on top of that, a lot of the people who are virtue signaling, who are saying that they believe this and that they support this, are some of the more wealthy people who do happen to be white males. They're not going to give up what they have. They're just going to tell everyone else that they have to.
Mhm.
So that's an interesting an interesting example of hypocrisy.
Well, and again, we go back to this same, when I listen to her, I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record. She's a Marxist.
Yes, and she's going to talk more about that. Let's keep listening if we can.
Okay.
American continent. Hegemony looked at the question of how beliefs and knowledge is shaped and how it is that people come to believe stories that legitimize unequal relations and the counter stories that arise from communities of color and other oppressed peoples that challenge the dominant narratives. And then
So stop
we're
there.
going to try to come up with less
Hegemony means ultimately what it's coming down to and what we're seeing it come down to. And this, again, I think that this is on page 24 of the ethnic studies curriculum, but this is where it's about saying that your religion is problematic.
Yeah.
That's where the ideas come from, the stories and the counter narratives. Well, you were taught to be Christian by your white cisgender or whatever. But here's all the other alternatives that you should listen to. And if you're a truly accepting, quote unquote, tolerant person, then you will see that my viewpoint has just as much viewpoint as yours. And then we're going to teach you that your viewpoint is wrong.
Yeah.
So
yeah, one of the books that David Barton brought up was the book that the Constitution is godless. And so he pointed out that many of the founders, they had the Bible as the basis. Most of the quotes, like over 30-something% of the origin of the quotes that supplied it, because they took 10 years to research what it was, what contributed to the formation of the ideas in the Constitution came from the Bible. And so to say that either it's godless or you can't be godless, or this society, you have to take religion out of it. Actually, it's integral and fundamental to the creation of this country. So to separate it and say that's not possible anymore is just they're missing the whole point of the origin.
and that's intentional, because you
Yes.
cannot eventually be obedient to the state if you believe it's something higher than the state. Can we keep playing, because I do want to hit 4.
Yes.
terminology. That's one of the discussions we're having on email right now. Regeneration, rehumanization, transformation, social justice deals with the process of healing, the healing from the trauma of oppression, and learning to work for social justice and to make social change. How you do this in the class gets to the question.
Did you guys hear it?
Yes.
They're flat out saying social change.
Yes.
They're flat out saying that the goal of all of this is social justice.
Okay, but how people understand that is very different. Most people can say, okay, social justice, that means for those people who are suffering from persecution, because it happens. There's persecution, there's prejudice, there's all sorts of things that happen in this world. So they hear social justice and like, oh good, it's going to be remedied. People are going to be nicer to each other. They're going to be able to understand each other. So when we hear the term social justice, that might be what they're understanding. But when I hear the term social justice, it means our country sucks. We need to knock it off and have a revolution and put in the real people who know the answers to this, which is,
right. And when
not
I hear
the
social
people,
justice,
it's
I don't
government.
have to hear or think. I look at our country since 2020. I look at living in Seattle and watching buildings burn to the ground. I look at kids sitting in the street skipping school because COVID but yet they're sitting in the street holding hands with each other because their teacher told them that this was being a social justice, this was advocating for social change. Then I look at the programs that these kids have been taught, and I look at the fact that BLM stands for buy large mansions, apparently. And I'm serious. And I'm looking at these things and they're already falling apart. I'm looking at DEI programs here and they're already falling apart. And people are going, why do we have to learn this crap? And I've got people calling me and saying, I don't understand. Or somebody who wants to go to med school and they're told, well, you have to wait because you're white and you're male. So it has to go to either a woman. We have this many spots open just for transgendered people. Okay, we have all sorts of crappy ideas out there under the name of social justice, which really just means turning our children into leftist activists. That's what social justice means. There is no justice should mean, when I think of justice, I think of that statue holding the two scales. We're not even sitting on a scale right now. There's just this in your face colonizing, and the kids are being taught to be the pawns.
Well, and if you want real social justice, you go to the Constitution. That is the origin of it. So you say, yes, let's do real social justice. Let's study the Constitution. Let's make sure the kids know how it works, how to keep big government out of the states. The federal government only has certain powers, and the states, and then the local government. And so let's teach true social justice by teaching about our foundation, our beautiful country. And so if that's what you want, that's how you get it. And you have laws that have consequences, right? And you enforce those laws. You don't let criminals run free and burn things down, right? Because
not justice.
Anarchy. So
it's not only is it not justice, but the only places that they tend to do that are the communities that supposedly they're trying to help. Because the other communities are like, yeah, that's not coming into our area. So it's their own areas. It's their stores that are getting closed down that nobody wants to go to because justice means reparations, means we can steal from you. This is a huge problem. Can we keep moving? Which one did we just do? Did we do 38?
Let's see.
Or where?
Can I just hit play?
Yeah, go ahead and hit play.
Of ethnic studies pedagogy. Some colleagues and I
Do you want me to go to 38? Is that what you said?
Yeah, go ahead and go to 38.
California chapter of the but they have a year-long ethnic studies course that they divided into 6 units. But San Francisco being very diverse, it's not focused on one group, but they also are not doing the group of the month approach, but instead are connecting diverse racial and ethnic groups, as well as gender and women's issues, as well as social class, as well as there's some disability rights in here. But let me read you the main concepts of their units. The first unit is on identity and narrative, around the question of whose narratives have we been listening to? Where do narratives come from, and how did that shape who we think we are? Systems and power, where students then learn how power is organized into systems, economic systems, political systems, and refracted through race and through class and through gender. Hegemony and counter hegemony, which earlier when I was talking about ways in which we think, what the stories are, where they come from, and what the counter stories are that emerge from oppressed communities. Humanization and dehumanization. What processes have students gone through that have been dehumanizing processes? How are people dehumanized, and how can we rehumanize people who have been put in positions of being dehumanized?
Okay, so I know maybe you want to keep talking, but she's talking about religion, right? So it's like, how are we going to make this world better? How, at the top, it was love, harmony. I don't remember what else. I guess I'll remind. I have to just show you guys that a little bit. Okay, so right here, love and respect, hope, community, solidarity and unity, self-determination and critical consciousness. Those are all things that come through religion, right? That is
Yes.
what religion does. So this is obvious that this is like on the same level as religion, what they're teaching. Now, what they should be teaching, in my opinion, if they want to accomplish this, is how our government functions. Yeah, I might say it 20 more times, because people who want to bring social justice, that's how you do it. And if you want to teach love, respect, hope, community, that's not the place of the schools. Those are things that we want, right? But the schools are to teach academics. And so bringing all of this other stuff in is in a sense bringing in religion.
It's also one-sided. It's their version of all of these things. I'm sorry, I feel no hope, but I feel no hope, especially for minority communities, when they are taught, when kids who do not feel this way are taught to look at the people, are taught to dig deep into how deeply they are oppressed. That is not a hopeful situation for children, for students. I just dropped my son off at school, and when I dropped him off, I counted the groups of kids, because I have to drive into another town, and I counted the groups of kids that were coming to lunch and how many of them were integrated, meaning how many Hispanic or Black kids were walking with white kids. And there were like 4 out of 7. Not, I mean, in our little town, that's a very small amount of people. Why would we then teach them that half of those kids are against them? Half of those kids have privilege, and have them constantly thinking about that? Because that's what we're doing with this stuff. I don't feel dehumanized. I did not feel dehumanized about race until the last couple of years. It was not a dehumanizing thing. Go ahead, Lynn, you've got something to say.
No, I the same way. And we're all, like we had mentioned once before, we are all, even in our tight little circle right here, our families are integrated.
Yes.
And so when I look at this, the thing that comes to my mind always, as I listen to her, as I read the content that we've been looking over, I'm wondering how it is that anyone who could read this, who is not a Marxist and against the nation itself, how they could allow this to come into the schools. So
because of the words on the top. Because I think a
What's
lot of
that?
administrators look at the words on the top and go, oh, that sounds good. Love and respect, hope, community, solidarity, unity, self-determination, and critical consciousness. And they do not dig into what any of that means.
Well,
They don't have
and
the
that's the
time or whatever
irony.
else. Yes.
That's the irony of the whole thing, is because they're supposed to be educators.
Right.
And if you look at the line on the top, that's pitiful, you know. So there needs to be someone who can go over, like what you're doing and what we're doing here right now, to pinpoint those points within the curriculum, within all this content, and be able to show the weaknesses in this study.
So look at this.
Because they're not going to look at it. It's like looking at some of the bills that go through on the legislators' table. They do not read all the lines, obviously.
Right. Look at this one, the relationship between cause and effect, the principle that there is a reason for why phenomena occur. But they're teaching these kids that the relationship is oppression. So, and she does talk one time, she says, well, it could be yourself. But it doesn't matter if you say once or twice, it could be yourself. If you spend all of this time teaching these kids why the system is corrupt, why it's all linked to capitalism, because that's what she says multiple times in this thing, which is why I had to take it in bite-sized chunks. Go ahead, someone's got something.
Well, this whole religious stuff that they're teaching, love and respect, hope, community, solidarity, and unity, to teach it, I don't know how you teach this, like the way they're approaching it to achieve this end, it doesn't follow, right? But where has it been successfully done outside of religion to teach this? what is the mean? So I'm curious about there. I'm not saying it can't be done, but
Right.
from my religious background, Christianity is the story of redemption. And this is the story of wallowing in your pain and sitting there and not leaving, and make sure that everybody else does too. It's the opposite. And so it's kind of like saying redemption from everything you've been or whatever brings love, hope, respect, community, because you realize that everybody else gets the same opportunity to be redeemed. But this is the opposite. It's like everybody else, there's inequality. Everybody go get in your cesspool and we're going to hang out like it was a jacuzzi. And so it's just, it doesn't follow, you know?
Yeah.
Well, this is all of those words that have been used are based on religious beliefs. If they are not taken to that end, then they become someone else's interpretation of what that looks like. And if you don't follow that interpretation of what we think unity is, what we think love is, what we think, then it becomes, hey, I don't know how else to say it. It's a dictatorship.
Yes.
Yes, they're redefining what they think love is.
Yes.
Love, oh yes, very good. So all of these terms up here, everyone's believing what they think it is.
Yeah.
And they've
Yes.
redefined love and respect and community. They've redefined each one of these words. What if we could come up with a different word of what it really means, you know? Love maybe means lawlessness, no consequences, nothing. Maybe that's what love is.
Right. Respect means forgetting your own values and making sure that other people are lifted up regardless of what that means for yourself. So specifically, it means pronouns.
Or regardless of what you've done. If you don't
Yes.
qualify, you respect them, you give them the position anyway because their
Yes.
skin color's different.
Yes.
So that's how
Or
respect
gender.
is
Yes.
defined.
Yes.
Well, we see that happening right now.
Right. Hope, I mean, quite frankly, it's just Obama's America. That was his slogan, was hope. And that is kind of the hope that they've hung on to, which is liberation. And then if you go over here into the
Wait,
last
liberation
column,
from what? Liberation from what?
Yeah.
capitalism, religion, whiteness.
Unless you are in that elite class.
So what is that? The liberatory process through critical consciousness and agency of uncovering, reclaiming, revaluing, and maximizing the potential of one's humanity in opposition to oppression and dehumanization. Now, humanity, I used to actually consider myself quite a humanist, but then I realized that to focus on one's humanity is to replace God with humanism. And I think that's could be concerning. Sorry, my nose is really plugged.
Okay, we forgive you. In saying that, I make these comments and they're pretty simple, but this complex ordeal that we're going through really comes down to some very simple concepts. And that is the only way to bring about happiness, acceptance, unity, all these words is, hey, is forget about yourself. They are focusing on self.
Yes.
Who am I? Where did I come from? What did my family go through? Oh my gosh, we didn't have all this. And what I came across this man from just recently and sat down with him in a little restaurant, and he was from Ghana. I think he was from Ghana. And he said, the problem that I see with so many of the races in this nation, because he was back east, is he said, they want a handout. In my country, you do not get handouts.
Right.
You at work to achieve, but here they want handouts. They feel like they deserve those handouts.
Entitlement, and that's what we're teaching in school.
Well, it's the
School is
opposite
becoming-
it's the opposite of John F. Kennedy. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
Yes.
And we're taking ask, don't ask what you can do for your country. Ask what they're going to do for you to make
Demand.
Yes, demand, not even ask.
No, and we're
March
teaching
and protest for that chocolate milk.
and we are teaching kids, we are teaching kids in school to be demanding. And what they're doing is they are demanding the scraps. And I don't think they understand that. So our kids are demanding the scraps instead of working for excellence and working for something of great potential and something they can be proud of. They're demanding the scraps. I saw today our governor celebrate that he's making a bunch of low-income housing, huge low-income housing complexes. And all I could look at was, okay, so you've got a bunch of people who are going to be living in the scraps instead of giving them the potential to be able to have ownership and take responsibility for their own home, no matter what that looks like. We're giving them the scraps. Some apartment complex that's going to be, lower in value, because that's always happens in apartment complexes. They're going to rent for forever, and they're going to be thankful to you for giving it to them.
So
that's what we're creating.
Well, I just spent time with a friend who was on the planning commission for a county, and she explained to me that all of the county leaders, the League of Town and Cities, would bring them in and they would talk about the affordable housing and how the rent would just go up. It would be just as expensive as anybody else. And that it's not what they're saying it is. And
just
that's
like this.
Yeah. So
just like this.
And I need to add a caveat here, because
Yes.
I love my kids. My kids go to elementary public school, and we have one of the best programs to teach pro-America stuff. So I'm not saying that all they're teaching. Oh, I love them. Their program brings me to tears. It's so pro-America. So this is about programs that are wanting to be pushed into schools. I'm not saying that all schools are doing this, because I couldn't honestly have asked for better teachers that teach my kids about America in my kids' elementary schools. Yeah. But we're talking about the dangers of these programs that are being pushed.
We're being proactive. We are trying to show people what will come soon if we don't, and that will be mandated.
No, and that looking what's really behind it. And that when you are teaching the Constitution and about America and teaching them to be good servant leaders, right? You're doing the right thing and stand up for it. So if teachers are watching this thinking we're hating on them, no, keep doing what you're doing when you're teaching about America and the social justice stuff, that what all your aims of doing it is resolved in the Constitution. So keep doing that. And when they say you need this to bring it in to make our world a better world, we want you to understand what's really behind it. And we're not trying to find fault with you, or because you bring me to tears with what you've taught my kids. It's so beautiful. So I just had to say that.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too. I think that the one thing is that we talk a lot from our own emotional viewpoint, and we talk a lot about the Constitution, but you have to understand that ethnic studies has no room for the Constitution. It does.
No.
This is a replacement. It's an utter, it is a quote unquote, as they will say, counter narrative. And that counter narrative is they are starting from the place of America is a cesspool that needs to be destroyed. That is what the people who are pushing this are starting. And what they're going to do, because I've heard it so many times, why are you against teaching about different cultures? That is not what this is. I want to keep going, and I know we might go a little bit longer today, but that's because I got all of these points. So if we can go to 41, just a little bit further. Okay, that should work.
Have practices around what their curriculum is, what their pedagogy is, and what the relationships are. And when I first learned about the program, I thought they started their planning with curriculum. It turns out I was wrong. In the book I'm co-editing, they have a chapter, and they start the chapter off after they talk about we schools and they schools by when they first started inventing this social justice education project. They went into a high school classroom and decided to treat the students.
That's all I needed was that social
Gave them
justice,
some reading.
the social justice education project. Oh, and what she's gonna say next, which we can read so that you can prove it or not, but is they started reading Paulo Freire. And
Say who he is, because people will be like, what?
but he basically teaches this idea that a child does not learn with a banking system of education. So a child is not somebody who goes to school to gain knowledge, but instead they create knowledge all on their own. And and his programs have failed dramatically. And he's a Marxist. He's an absolute Marxist. And his idea, what he basically does, Pedagogy of the Oppressed is his book. And what he basically does is shows people to look at the world through their lenses of oppression. What are the problems? Find the problems. It is not important that your child learns to read or write. It's important what they learn to read or write. So it's important that when they are reading a book, Cinderella is not okay unless Cinderella's the stepmother and the stepsisters are white and Cinderella is Hispanic. And so everything needs to be centered around their type of oppression constantly.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll tell you what.
Very easy baby summary. If you want to learn more, I suggest going to New Discourses, which is James Lindsay's website, and looking up his sources for Paulo Freire. I like him a lot because he always shares the direct sources. He quotes directly from the person's own work, which is what we're trying to do
here. The pitiful thing is when I'm listening to this, I'm listening to her words, I just listened to your words. The fact there's places where you can graduate and they're next door neighbors. Your child can graduate if they are of color. They don't have to learn to read or write. They don't have to know any math. Yep. So where does that put them? And it goes right back to what you said earlier, Carrie, in that it's very disparaging because those ethnic groups that they're so-called concerned about are the victims of what's going to be going on and what is going on right now. So they're not going to be able to read or write. They're the pawns.
And the other thing is nobody wants to work with them. So if we can go to 48.
Analysis of discrimination, because they hadn't at the K-12 level, and it provided a window for understanding the world that a lot of the students just didn't have. If there was cross-group interaction in the class, that deepened the potency of the class.
Go back just a little bit further.
Changing the student.
Yeah, what she's talking about here is the effects, and she says that this is the first time that the people are exposed to looking at the world and seeing the world through a lens of oppression. So, yeah.
This research was done at the higher ed level. There was some at the K-12, but most of it was at the higher ed level. And basically what it found is that taking an ethnic studies course or a women's studies course had generally a positive impact on students' cross-group attitudes, mostly because for a lot of students, it was the first time they had been exposed to a systemic analysis of discrimination, because they hadn't at the K-12 level, and it provided a window for understanding the world that a lot of the students just didn't have. If there was cross-group interaction in the class.
Who says it's positive? How many families, how many parents are crying because their children are nothing like the people they knew before they went to a university? This is one side's view of what's positive. You need to think about that. Like, this is one group saying, well, it's super positive if your child no longer believes in quote unquote the myth of innocence. No longer, oh, your child is liberated because they now believe what we want them to believe, and that's
Right.
why it's positive.
That's right.
Yes, I can see why that's positive. I mean, that's the measure of it. We want some on our team, right?
Yes.
So there's
In
their
terms of their
positive.
long-term effects. These are not the
Mhm.
same long-term effects. Do you remember we used to have like this bumper sticker that would say, if you aren't a liberal in your 20s, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative by your 30s, you have no brain. Okay, so, and I can see that, like, you want to be compassionate and thoughtful and all of these things, but what we're doing now is extreme harm. Whether that is we're creating Molotov cocktails, or whether that is we're removing parts of our body. We're doing these things that have extreme consequences. Maybe harm isn't the right word, but they do have forever consequences. And these people who are just like, we got one. Meanwhile, if a person changes their minds like we do when we mature, hopefully, and we become more responsible, you still have the scars of what these ideas have done. Whether those are you alienated your family and you're not speaking to your parents anymore, or you're not speaking to your siblings anymore, or whether that is, you've participated in criminal activity because you were told that that was social activism. You have to live with that. Our children have to live with that. And who says that's a good thing? Well, she does. Right?
No, Christine.
She does. Ethnic studies does. But
Yeah.
I think there's many parents who would not agree that that's a good thing and would like to see their kids grow up happy and healthy and not have these extremely traumatic things, these levels of guilt.
Yeah, it's the cesspool jacuzzi. That's just where they're pointing everybody to go. They're like, come on over here.
Yes, because
wallow.
people who live in rot need other people to live in the sewer, as my friend told me. So and they're pulling our kids into the sewer. And so much of it is because they don't spend the time to actually look at the issues. Can we go to 5110?
No, just finishing.
That deepened the ethnic studies that centers race and racism, that treats students of color and students from other marginalized communities as intellectuals, that connects with and engages with communities that students come from and becomes relevant to addressing community needs and community problems, and that includes dialogue across differences and helps us learn to talk and collaborate across our differences. That's the kind of ethnic studies that the research shows makes a powerful impact on students, both students of color as well as white students. So thank you.
That's it.
Anyone can claim research shows.
I welcome you to today's.
Yes.
Oh no, who does?
Can we open our ethnic studies books just so that we can show that we really did conquer, that we didn't just go off and we really did actually go through the stuff that was in what we were looking
at. Okay, so did you want to start on page 22?
Yeah, and just like really quickly going through it.
Okay, so can I just do the thing I've highlighted really fast?
Yes.
Just because I don't know how much time we have. I'm just
going to
make my screen a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. Well, this isn't relevant to what we covered today, but I do have questions about it. So this is just what she was saying. The pursuit of justice and equity is not only something that students practice in the classroom, but a skill that they develop for use in later life as citizens and proponents for social change. that only if they don't understand the system that they're working in, right? By keeping them ignorant of how to make actual change happen. How do you get a law passed? What happens if you break the law? You know, that's where the real power comes, is in working within a system that's functioned for over 200 years, 230 years. That's when you can have real power. But they're saying real power comes from screaming and yelling.
Democracy, right?
Yeah, and we're
Every
not a
single one of these
democracy.
people is going to learn about democracy as if that is what our country is built on.
Right.
And it's
And this is what she talked about as well. Students have just as much as educators to bring to the table for mutual learning. No, that's why they're in school. Yes, we can all learn from each other. We learn from our kids when we raise them. But if kids are determining their own level of intellectuality or whatever it is, or education, then really ignorance is the goal, because they're there for a reason. And people who are ignorant are easier to control because they can't see through the lies. They can't spot them. They can't start looking for the actual resources to disprove the lies that are there for them. And so this is just all to keep you down in ignorance. Engages students as peer learners with mutual understanding and appreciation. I agree with mutual understanding and appreciation in all relationships, but they're in school to learn from the teacher. And then again, suggestions for ways that students can participate in service learning or activism in their school or local community. This would be much better put, how to participate in their civically, how to civically engage in their society in the established means that we've been doing, instead of activism, which in my opinion is screaming and yelling. So, let's see. And then this last one, being born out of a grassroots community movement. Remember, we talked about that, the actual being born out of the grassroots community movement. We talked what it really looked like, and their crazy demands, and the administration couldn't even meet it. I don't remember what episode that was, but community partnership, it was the opposite of community partnership. It was tantrum throwing, and accountability are central to its identity. So,
well, and here's the thing, is that the new community partnership is that ESG score. It is making sure and demanding that everybody follows along. Every business, every, you know, in Washington, it was put your black square up and and appalling to me that people didn't know history enough to be like, yeah, I'm not participating in that. Because how is that any different than put your star up the
yeah. And
Right.
community partnership, as defined by what they say community is, it means going along with everybody else. So,
Yes.
so when we say community partnership, what do they actually put into practice? So thank you
Yes.
for that example. We're fighting for our country here, and this is something that's going against our country, and our kids need to be taught the Constitution and how to participate within our country in a civic way to get good things to happen for good people. And we're not
Yes.
against good things happen. We're not against learning about other cultures. We're just for standing for our country.
Lynn,
Well, you know,
oh, go ahead.
my husband made a comment one time, and he said it should be mandatory that in a high school, before you graduate, you should be able to take the class that the people that come into the country and want to become the citizenship class, that they can answer the questions about this country. And remember that those people that are coming into the country are seeking for something they do not have where they're coming from. And so you do have to have that basics of what freedom, understanding of the Constitution give. What they're doing is they're trying to create, and just they're trying to create a generation of intellectually ignorant people so that they move along with the crowd. And it reminds me of a child throwing a tantrum. What before they're able to learn how to monitor their behavior and think intelligently, they throw themselves on the floor, they kick their feet, and they scream and cry. until they learn there are other motives, more civilized, to work and get what you actually would like to have. So that's what this all reminds me of. Sorry, once
And right now,
again.
no, right now it does look like they're winning. I was just watching today a woman who decided that she deserved to sit in first class. And because she deserved it, she throws a fit. And I would not be surprised if she ends up getting, an American Airlines permanent first class because, ooh, racism. It, but in the long run, you don't even win on that social thing because you cannot hold a relationship if you are so entitled that everything constantly revolves around you.
Yeah.
You're making for very, very depressed, very disturbed kids. But I did want to hit one more thing with you, Lynn, and I'd asked you about as a former teacher, when they come down with these guidelines, because this is part of those pages, and it says that all administrators and all teachers need to be on board with this. How do they ensure that teachers are on board?
I was trying to think about that, and this is really, you ask the question, how are they monitored? How are they making sure? And just in my experience, you hold meetings, you go into I know the administrators, teachers would go in and they'd pop into the classes to see what you were actually doing without any heads up, so that it was they could just catch you surprised. The meetings to compare, and
Do they do trainings?
they have trainings. And that was one of my worries, and the fact that they have some words in here that are good. They're good if they're taken the right way. However, in the trainings, in the monitoring, in the teacher being alone in that classroom with their students, it's subjective. Unless there's a way that they can monitor it hardcore, and I don't think there is. But I know that there are so many teachers coming in, and I'm sorry if I blither, but I just know that in a classroom, I have walked in classrooms where I am shocked at what's going on, what they're supposed to be teaching, and when I walk into the classroom, I'm going, dude, if I were in this class, I'd be out tomorrow afternoon, or I'd have a nervous breakdown. Because the teachers, unless they have monitors and cameras in the classroom, what they do and what they'd have to do is instill the philosophy in the teachers. And I'm here to tell you that there are a lot of teachers who are going to comply. So I don't know if that sounds really ignorant. And it's not all of them. We have some really, like Brooke said, there are some excellent teachers out there. They're there for the right purpose. But I know that I have friends whose children have graduated from high school here in Provo, hating the United States and loving socialism. So,
And what they would say is, well, they're getting that off of their cell phones. But regardless, yes, kids have cell phones in their classrooms. Should they? That's an argument for another day. But they're in school more often than anywhere else.
Once again, me being in the classroom and students having, they have cell phones, and there's no way that you can, allowing the parents allow them to bring them to school. If I see a kid in my classroom that has had a cell phone, I say, thank you so much. I appreciate this. I'll take good care of it when your parents come to get it, so they, they do. But what that teacher, the power that teacher has inside of a classroom, if they have been trained, and they would be, and for them to say that they have ethnic courses, curriculum, that has to, we're going to handpick those people. They don't even, to me, what I read is they don't even have to be certified, which really it doesn't mean a whole lot for a lot of people right now. But for them to go cross curricular, it shows me how important it is for them to, again, I'm just going to say it, brainwash the kids. If I can put this through all of we can go into English, we can go into history, we can go into science, and they go into art, and they'll go into PE, they'll go into all these different classrooms and integrate this ethnic studies program to make sure that this oppression, supremacy, privilege, whatever it is that you want
And
to call
gender
it,
ideology. I think people
and gender
understand.
ideology is enforced, and it would be.
Yes.
Unless someone stops this at the base, it would be.
And that's what people need to understand, is that when ethnic studies comes, we're not talking about culture. And even though a lot of our schools are silent right now about the gender issue, and a lot of them have just we're not going to talk about it, we're not going to address it. When ethnic studies comes in, that is a demand as part of ethnic studies. It is absolutely a demand. You cannot have ethnic studies, which is mandated next year, without having respect for all genders as part of it.
But once again, the academics are out the window. It's not about the academics, it's about the ideology. And when they take a course that should be a standalone course, in my opinion, when they take that and infiltrate it, that they have an agenda.
Yes.
They have an agenda.
They do. I think we hit everything that we intended. I mean, I think that we hit all the pages. Is there anything that you guys think that we're like, we missed that? But I honestly feel like they took Christine Sleeters' speech and just wrote that on the pages. When I was watching it, I was like, oh, well, that covers that. That covers that. So was there anything else that you guys wanted to hit today? Or I think we're good. Okay. All right. Well, then I will see you.
Oh, can I just say one thing before we say bye-bye?
Yeah.
Rachel put down here on a piece of paper, she reminded me in all of this, what's on the Justice Building, e pluribus unum. And it simply means out of many, one.
Right.
That's what this nation is supposed to be about. And that is what they do not want.
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfectly stated. I think that was perfect. I think we will end it there, and I'll reach out to you guys about tomorrow. Sounds good.
Okay.
If that works for you.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.